Hello everybody, my name is Dart and I drive a modified truck. And today I'm going to be doing my best to answer the question, is modifying your daily driver worth it? You see, I drive that truck, my 2001 Toyota Tacoma Pre-Runner V6, and it took me a long time to finally pull the trigger and make the decision to modify the things that I have on it. I haven't modified it extensively. I only have wheels from a 2018 Tacoma that my grandfather was kind enough to give to me, and I have an aftermarket muffler installed that I welded in myself. It is a Flowmaster Original 40 series. And with both of these mods, there was a bit of uncertainty before I put them on. The tires and wheels, I wasn't really sure if it was going to fit properly. I wasn't sure if it was going to make me need an alignment because it was different from the stock. I just wasn't entirely confident that they would be as good for my vehicle as the wheels and tires that it came with from the factory. And with the muffler, even more so. Once you get starting on modifying your engine and stuff like that, there's always the concern of, well, what happens if I get pulled over by a police officer? Can I get fined additionally? Or can I get fined period if he wasn't pulling me over for something that he would ordinarily give me a ticket for, but then he sees my vehicle's modified? Would I get a ticket for that? Would I get pulled over just for the modifications on my vehicle? I mean, these are all things that I think a lot of us think about before we modify our car. And today I'm going to be trying to talk about the pros and the cons of modifying your vehicles, specifically your daily driver. And I'm going to be trying to kind of clear the water on this for a lot of you guys and hopefully help you to make your own decision about whether or not you will end up modifying your daily driver down the line. So the first thing that we need to consider when modifying a daily driver is that it retains its daily drivability. It should remain relatively comfortable, easy to drive, not obnoxious, but it should also be entertaining enough that we don't hate driving all the time. So you need to find a balance between comfort and also driving pleasure. And so a lot of the time, that's why a lot of us turn to modifications in the first place. We want to make our vehicle more exciting, more fun to drive around. That's why we start to look at modifications. But some of these modifications can improve one of the factors, but also decrease the other. If you want your vehicle to be more comfortable, you're probably, not always, but generally speaking, you'll be reducing its performance in some way. You have comfortable suspension, well, you're going to miss out on some steering feel. If you want something nice and quiet that doesn't ever irritate you, can't ever be annoying because you can't hear the engine at all, you're going to miss out on the fun of hearing your engine really scream when you have to get on it, or when you want to get on it. And so you have to think about it as a trade-off. Everything that you do with your daily driver and cars in general is going to be a trade-off, but keeping in mind that we are talking about daily drivers here, we especially need to consider those trade-offs because they are supposed to be multi-purpose vehicles that we can use whenever we need to go out on the street. And so we have to keep that in mind. First off, I'm going to be talking about wheels and tires. And so this is probably the safest modification that you can do. Chances are it's not going to drastically alter how your vehicle feels. I mean, of course, the tire compound that you get, that will determine it a little bit, and as well the size of the wheel versus the size of the tire and how low profile they are and everything. Obviously, that's going to cause some alterations, but if you're straightly going for a cosmetic difference and you get the exact same size and same tires and everything on your new wheels, you're really not going to see much of a change. When I was putting my grandfather's 2018 TRD Sport Tacoma wheels on my Tacoma, I was a little worried because the offset on those wheels was dramatically less, like the negative offset. And so I was strongly concerned that I was going to have issues with rubbing because they'd be a little bit farther inside than the stock wheels. And I was worried that, especially at full lock, I would end up having rubbing issues because the wheels were farther inside the wheel wells. Ultimately, we ended up test fitting it and it fit perfectly fine, but it's going to be difficult sometimes to find aftermarket wheels at a reasonable price that are going to fit your vehicle. And then there's also the issue of, with aftermarket wheels, they can be very expensive. And so there's the question, well, do I want to get a legitimate brand that isn't going to fail on me and snap when I'm driving down the highway or when I hit a curb? Am I going to risk getting a cheaper, more cheaply made product and have that issue without having to pay as much money? Because ultimately, you don't want your daily driver that you drive everywhere to have something extremely fancy on it, because the more you drive a vehicle, chances are the there's a higher probability that you're going to get into an accident with that vehicle. And so you don't want to put anything super dramatically expensive into that, because if you do get in an accident, especially if you don't report those expenses that you're spending on modifications to your insurance, you're definitely going to be hurting afterward. So that, I feel like, sums up wheels and tires pretty well. They won't dramatically alter anything. So if you are really wanting to put some aftermarket wheels and they're not dramatically different from your stock ones, and you're not trying to run some crazy camber or stance or try to fill your wheel wells to the complete utter maximum with the lowest profile tires possible, you're probably pretty safe going with wheels and tires. Moving on to another really common modification that people make, we have exhaust. And exhaust is probably the most noticeable modification to your daily driver by other people, because it increases volume. And that is a very big deal. Because you're driving this daily driver everywhere, you have to keep in mind people are going to hear your car or truck or whatever it is you drive. And if your car is obnoxiously loud, chances are you may end up attracting the ire of your neighbors at some point. You might also attract attention from a police officer, especially in certain locations. California comes to mind right now, AB 1824. In some places, loud exhausts are really not given a lot of tolerance. Fortunately, where I live, I haven't had any problems since I put my muffler on. I've only been driving around for 2 months since then. I have driven past police officers. I haven't received any complaints from my neighbors. However, there's also what you have to consider, and that is how you drive. If putting a louder muffler on your car is going to make you drive more aggressively as well, and drive in a manner that's going to attract more attention on top of your vehicle being louder, you may want to think twice before you do so, because you really don't want to make yourself into a ticket magnet. You don't want to make your neighbors hate you, because nobody likes to be hated by the people around them. I know, sometimes it's worth it for the car, but generally speaking, especially if you don't live by yourself, you want your neighbors to like the people who live in your house. Just a general rule of thumb. However, I have other neighbors who have really loud vehicles, and I mean, literally within like 3 houses of me, there are 3 extremely loud vehicles. There's a Harley, there's a Silverado, and there's my truck. And so nobody really cares around me, but if I lived in another part of the neighborhood, or a different neighborhood even, that might be a completely different story. I've got friends with loud vehicles, and man, their neighbors do not like them at all. And so on a daily driver, muffler modification, I mean, if you go for a quieter model that just kind of changes the tone, makes it a bit more aggressive, you'll probably be fine. I mean, it's not really a big deal. Shouldn't be a super pricey investment. Just kind of some fun things you can put on so that you can really hear the engine a lot better when you open it up. But if you're going to go for a full-on muffler delete, in a lot of places that's illegal, or a resonator delete, that can dramatically increase the volume of your vehicle. You might want to just consider what you're going to be using your daily drivers for, what your neighbors are like, how strict the police are in your area. So you really got to think about those things before you just send it and put in a full straight pipe or MagnaFlow glass pack or something like that, and you wake up your entire neighborhood when you start your vehicle every morning. Next, we're going to get into suspension modifications. Now, I haven't done any radical suspension modifications to my truck. In fact, I haven't really done any at all. However, I have done a lot of research about the different modifications that people often put on their vehicles that are kind of relatively inexpensive. And so we're going to talk a bit about bushings, specifically in suspension, and stuff like coilovers, lift kits, lowering springs, etc., so on and so forth. So before we really get into any of this, I want to preface it and say that I'm not talking about like insane suspension like Wisefab for drifting or like long travel off-road suspension. I'm just talking about basic stuff that people will put on their vehicle. I don't really have a problem with modifying your suspension on a daily driver. Ultimately, it all comes down to personal preference. If you prefer steering feel over ride quality and plushness and stuff like that, go ahead, modify your suspension, get some coilovers, get some performance lowering springs. Don't get the cheap ones from the $50 kit on eBay, and don't cut your stock springs. Don't do that, because that's just bad. Get something relatively legit, and you'll probably not have too bad a time if you don't really mind that you're sacrificing ride quality. If you're getting a bigger kick out of driving around every day, I mean, that's pretty cool. Some places do take lowered cars negatively, though, and there are rules about how high you can lift your car, how low you can lower your car in certain states, areas, etc., etc., so make sure you check that before you go and pull the trigger on any of that. Lift kits can make your vehicle a bit more unsteady and unstable, so there is that to consider. And a lot of the time, to compensate for the higher center of gravity, they make your suspension a bit stiffer. So if you're okay with a stiffer suspension, if you want to be up high and have that additional view space, and also if you are an occasional off-roader and you take your daily driver off-roading, if it's some kind of truck or other off-road vehicle, then, I mean, a moderate lift kit is acceptable. I think the highest you would want to go on a daily driver is 6 inches. Other than that, I mean, that's pushing it even, because 6 inches is pretty ludicrously high. But I think lift kits, lowering springs, and even like poly bushings, I wouldn't do full solid metal bushings on a daily driver. That's more of like a race car, track car kind of thing. But if you're just wanting to put some polys on there, get a bit more steering feel without completely going full race car, I think that that's reasonable. Next up is cold air intakes, short ram intakes, any intake that isn't the stock air box. I personally don't really see a need for them on a daily driver, considering how much they can mess things up. Mufflers, generally speaking, you're not going to mess much up unless you're messing with catalytic converters, but those aren't mufflers, those are catalytic converters. But an intake can dramatically alter your vehicle, and not always for the better. A lot of cold air intakes cause check engine lights to come on because the MAF doesn't like how the air is going into the engine. They can alter your airflow in ways that you really don't want. Oiled filters on cold air intakes, a lot of cold air intakes use oiled filters. The filter can end up causing tiny little particles of oil to get all over your MAF sensor, completely destroy it, making you need a new one. MAF sensors are not cheap and they are extremely delicate, so the chance of having a good MAF sensor in a junkyard car pretty low, so I wouldn't really recommend breaking your MAF sensor. Cold air intakes also they just really don't do anything unless you have a tune on your vehicle, because your stock ECU has a set air fuel ratio that it's going to try and preserve, and so if you put a cold air intake on there, yeah, you might get some more air in there, but your ECU is going to kind of freak out and it's going to decrease your throttle response once it figures out, oh, I'm getting more air. I think. I'm not an expert on ECUs and engine tuning. That's just my understanding of it. If there's one of you guys who knows more about that, is a tuner, go ahead and drop that in the comment section. But just what I've heard, cold air intake's not the best. Also, there's the problem to consider. Cold air intake will allow more dust and particles into your engine. With greater airflow comes worse filtering, generally speaking, as a general rule. There's also the problem if you get a true cold air intake that goes down into your wheel well or something funny like that, and you drive through a puddle, you get water up in there, that water can get into your engine. You don't want to hydrolock your engine because that is very bad, very expensive. Usually there's no coming back from a hydrolocked engine unless you're a crazy engine builder and you want to completely rebuild your engine. Unless that's your thing and you want to spend $10,000 on rebuilding your engine, I can't endorse cold air intakes. If you already got one and you like it and you don't drive through puddles, fine, but it's just a risk that I'm really not willing to take with my vehicle, especially considering how expensive they can be compared to what they actually do. And then there's cosmetic modifications. There are so many different cosmetic things that you can do to your vehicle these days. It's frankly ridiculous. The only thing that I can really tell you as far as cosmetics go is if you like the look of it and it doesn't cause a decrease in the quality of your driving experience, go for it. If you really want to, that's really what you're dying to do, go ahead, put that cosmetic mod on your car, get that giant wing, get that front splitter that makes you have to go slower over speed bumps. If you don't really care, go for it. If I'm going to say cosmetic enhancements that you don't want to do, don't plastic dip your wheels. I know, it can be really cool. But generally speaking, when people do it themselves, it really doesn't come out looking great at all. I mean, I'm not saying that you can't do a good plastic dip job, but plastic dip tends to kind of absorb dust and stuff, and so you got brake dust all over your plastic dipped wheels, and it's just not a good time. But not a plastic dip expert either, so maybe that works great. I just think often plastic dip wheels looks kind of silly. Same with just taking regular spray paint and putting it on your wheels, that often looks silly as well. Point is, if you're going to do cosmetic enhancements, make sure that you go and spend the money to get them done right, that they look clean and nice and they keep your daily driver looking respectable. Because, in my honest opinion, I think that vehicles that have tasteful modifications that are done with high quality finish, they can improve the look of a car. No matter what, whether you're a car person or you're not a car person, you really don't have a lot of respect for modifications that are so exorbitant, extravagant, and over the top that they're put on terribly and they look bad. I'm talking about like the cardboard body kits and spoilers that are unevenly placed on the car. Please don't do that. Interior as well, don't be that guy who spray paints all your trim pieces and they look really bad and they don't match, and don't do that either. Keep your vehicle looking relatively nice, keep it clean, keep it good, and I think that you really can't go too wrong as long as you keep those things in mind when you're modifying a daily driver. So just to review what we talked about exhaust, we talked about suspension, we talked about wheels and tires, and we talked about cosmetics. With all of those things, the most important thing to remember is it going to improve my driving experience? Is it going to make my daily driving experience a worse kind of deal? If it's going to make you attract a lot more police attention, you're going to get a lot more tickets, you probably don't want to go for that modification. If it's going to make you happier and it's not going to make you suffer anymore, I would say that that's a pretty safe bet. If it's going to not affect your engine's lifespan in any way, if it's not going to decrease your vehicle's usability in any way, I would say, yeah, that modification sounds a-okay to me. But always remember that with a daily driver especially, it's important to keep moderation in mind. You don't want anything particularly extreme because then you're getting into track car, drift car, off-road, insane super rig territory. And with a daily vehicle, you really don't want to do that because you're going to attract a lot of negative attention, and you're also not going to have the most comfortable experience because your vehicle is custom tailored to a specific purpose rather than being a general all-purpose daily driver. So guys, I really hope that you did enjoy watching this video and learning more about whether or not you should put modifications on your daily driven vehicle. If you go down there, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, leave a like. I'll keep putting out some awesome content like this in the future. You can come to my channel for automotive vlogs, how-to videos, videos like this where I talk about questions and issues with the automotive world, stuff like, I'm talking a whole bunch of awesome automotive stuff. Cars, trucks, motorcycles, I've got it all on this channel, and I'm trying to make a really, really awesome channel where you guys can see me progress from a fledgling automotive enthusiast into a knowledgeable and extremely skilled mechanic, tuner, all of the above. I really want to take you guys along for the ride, so go down there, hit that subscribe button. Let me know what you thought of the video in the comment section and what you think I can improve for the next one, and we will see you guys next time. Peace out.